Excellencies, members of the Diplomatic Corps, members of the media, ladies and gentlemen, it is my distinct honor to introduce the esteemed Undersecretary for State for Public Diplomacy, Elizabeth Allen. Ambassador Allen is a tireless champion for global democracy, a voice for freedom, and a leader in the fight against disinformation and the erosion of democratic values. Her dedication to these issues spans decades of her distinguished career in public service and international diplomacy. Her leadership was instrumental in the United States' recent joining of the International Partnership for the Information and Democracy, a testament to her unwavering commitment to collaborative solutions. Undersecretary Allen brings a wealth of experience and expertise to this critical conversation. She was nominated by President Joe Biden and confirmed by the Senate last June. In this role, she is responsible for promoting U.S. foreign policy around the world through strategic communication, cultural exchanges, and public democracy. Ambassador Allen is a long-time communication and public affairs strategist and especially public policy issues. She previously served as Assistant Secretary of Public Diplomacy and Public Affairs at the U.S. Department of State. She began her career in the Office of Global Women's Issues and Bureau of International Narcotics and Law Enforcement. Presently, in her role as Undersecretary of State, Ambassador Allen has focused on advancing U.S. foreign policy through strategic communication, countering foreign malign influence. Her work has involved a proactive approach to harnessing innovative technologies, particularly artificial intelligence, for modernizing public diplomacy initiatives. Recently, her team facilitated the Memorandum of Understanding between the Smithsonian Institute and the State Department, aiming to enhance cultural, education, and scientific collaboration. She has also worked on strengthening the State Department's communication strategies to counter disinformation and has signed memorandums of understanding with Bulgaria, Republic of Korea, and the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Japan. Her work has involved promoting transparency, accountability, participation, and representation in the decision-making process at the global level. Throughout her term as Undersecretary, Ambassador Allen has traveled extensively, representing her country and engaging with foreign dignitaries, international forums, and local communities in France, Fiji, Vanuatu, Australia, Norway, Bulgaria, the Czech Republic, the Republic of Korea, Indonesia, and Japan. And on this trip, she has visited Jordan and will visit India when she leaves Sri Lanka. These visits clearly underscore the U.S. commitment to building global understanding and cooperation and the importance of the Indo-Pacific countries in the U.S. foreign policy. Today, as we face a multitude of challenges to global democracy, from rising authoritarianism to the weaponization of information, Ambassador Allen's talk will be critical. I am confident that her insights and vision will help guide us through these complex times and pave the way for a more just, inclusive, and democratic future for all, and set Sri Lanka on a path of economic growth and prosperity. I'm sure she will also mention safeguarding personal freedom and legislation, including the Anti-Terrorism Bill and the Online Safety Act, which impact on the media and on us as ordinary citizens. It's important that we let Ambassador Allen share her thoughts with us and not necessarily point fingers at the events of the past, but rather look at the future. Welcome, Ambassador Allen. The floor is yours.
Well, thank you, Kumar, for that extraordinarily generous and warm welcome. I am so pleased to be here. This is my third day of 3 days in Sri Lanka, and it is so clear that there is a very special energy and momentum here, and our job is to make sure that we build on that momentum. So in that spirit, I just want to say that it's fantastic to be here today, truly, and I want to acknowledge my partner and friend, U.S. Ambassador to Sri Lanka, Julie Chung. She has represented the people of America here in Sri Lanka, and she has charted this chapter of U.S.-Sri Lanka relations. I'm thrilled to be here today. Thank you to the Sri Lanka Press Institute. Your dedication to journalism's craft is inspiring and necessary. So know this, the U.S. Embassy and the United States of America are all in on supporting your incredible work. Sure, we might bump heads over a story now and then, but above all, we are your biggest fans. We are all in on programs that hone skills because we believe in your right to pursue journalism freely and fearlessly. As I find myself in this room, in a room full of journalists, and as someone who has worked with and deeply respected journalists for my entire career, I want to thank the journalists for protecting the rights and freedoms of journalists here in Sri Lanka around the world. You're ensuring that all citizens enjoy the right to express their ideas and opinions openly and freely. And even in difficult times, you continue to press forward and ask difficult questions that are necessary. Your commitment to seeking out the truth and shouting it from the rooftops remains a democratic staple, and I truly appreciate what you do. So it's only fitting today that I begin my remarks by telling a story that I think is very relevant in light of today's topic about the media's role in democracy. Over a century ago, American media coined the term muckraker. Muckraker referred to journalists who delved into societal issues and exposed corruption. And although the term carried a somewhat negative connotation, labeling these journalists as mere gossip mongers today, we now honor them as the pioneers of investigative journalism. These muckrakers played a pivotal role in ushering the progressive era in the United States, a time of significant social and political reform in American history. Even US President Theodore Roosevelt then referred to these muckrakers, criticizing their focus on society's flaws through figures like Lincoln Steffens. Lincoln Steffens' work shed light on corruption and spurred a nationwide call for accountability and reform. Steffens' book, called The Shame of Cities, was published in 1904, and it made him renowned for uncovering corruption within American cities, highlighting the nefarious links between political leaders, businesses, and organized crime. His fearless journalism raised critical awareness about the urgent need for governmental and corporate accountability. Steffens wasn't acting as a public relations officer for the government. His role was to uncover the truth, however unpleasant that may be. Faced with the stark realities of what Steffens presented, American officials and the public were compelled to confront the pivotal question: what kind of country do we want to be? Is this the kind of country we aspire to be? And the answer was a resounding no. Steffens' work didn't just expose wrongdoing, it sparked a nationwide demand for reform and played a crucial role in fostering a dialogue about the essential role of investigative journalism in ensuring that those in power remain accountable. This story showcases how freedom of the press and freedom of expression are not just fundamental human rights, they are also vital contributors to a country's development, growth, and future. This brings me to my main point and why we're all here today: how the global media space supports democracy and fosters peaceful, just, and inclusive societies. In my mind, in most of yours, the correlation is obvious. When a government constricts the rights and freedoms of its citizens, the future and the development of the country will naturally suffer. Globally, we are witnessing serious and escalating challenges to media freedom. The United States stands firmly for the freedom of expression, advocating for press freedom both online and offline, and ensuring the safety of journalists and media workers worldwide. Unfortunately, these essential freedoms are under threat globally, including concerns raised here in Sri Lanka. When governments intensify efforts to withhold information from the public by restricting internet access and censoring content online, we must speak up. Notably, when Sri Lanka's parliament passed the Online Safety Bill in January, the United States voiced concerns over the potential effects on freedom of expression, innovation, and privacy, something we continue to do privately and publicly. We know it's common to hear arguments against unfettered freedom of expression. Critics claim that the media is biased, aiming to embarrass governments and undermine public trust. Others worry that without checks, freedom of expression might fuel the spread of misinformation, an issue on all of our minds. Some argue that an unchecked press can incite tension and compromise security. And there's concern that continuous reports on corruption, violence, and political strife can tarnish a nation's image, deterring investment and hampering development. But, very clearly, I believe the media's bias should lean towards the public's interest, acting as a guardian to ensure that leaders fulfill their duties. This principle holds in Sri Lanka, in the United States, and globally. The challenge of negative press, often labeled as fake news or biased journalism, is not new. For generations, governments and the media have navigated a complex, sometimes adversarial relationship. This dynamic is not unique to any one nation, and in the United States, for instance, presidents from both major political parties have experienced their share of friction with the press. This tension is actually a hallmark of democratic societies. It plays a crucial role in fostering transparency and encouraging effective governance. It's a familiar scene we all know. Politicians and journalists engage in heated exchange, especially when leaders feel their actions are misrepresented, leading to accusations of inaccuracies and biased reporting. And I can tell you from my time in the White House with President Obama that we viewed this tension as a feature, not a bug, something to embrace as a value of democratic societies and democratic governance. The press's duty is to deliver facts as they stand, shedding light on government's achievements as well as spotlighting where their programs or policies may fall short. This transparency not only informs the public, but also strengthens a nation as it encourages constructive action and improvement. And suppressing voices only complicates matters further. Attempting to conceal issues rather than addressing them is akin to hiding a broken tool rather than fixing it. And true progress, true trust in institutions, comes from collaborative dialogue, even if it means embracing the messiness of public discourse. This was evident in mine and the ambassador's visit yesterday to a place in Colombo called Idea Hell. Idea Hell is a hub for creative minds and digital content creators, dubbed Where Good Ideas Go to Die. My interaction with these young, innovative minds there underscored the critical need to protect freedom, not just for journalists, but for creators and entrepreneurs to explore and innovate without fear. Yes, some good ideas die, but creators should be free to think and to attempt and even to fail. That is how we achieve progress. Overly broad and ambiguous limitations on expression can choke creativity, robbing society of potential advancements that fuel innovation and fuel economic growth. A climate of censorship not only stifles innovation, but also dampens critical community spirit to solve pressing challenges with novel solutions. And that spirit exists here in Sri Lanka. I've seen it in the last 3 days. We must continue to encourage it. Let me close with a message to journalists here and around Sri Lanka. I urge you to reflect on the initial spark that drew you to journalism. It is doubtful that it was the allure of wealth or fame. We know it. But more likely, it was a drive to enact change and to contribute to a better Sri Lanka. Should these be the forces that drive you, I implore you to persevere. Your dedication, your rights, and your freedoms are pivotal to the nation's ongoing growth and prosperity. Consider this. Among you, who of you will emerge as a modern-day Lincoln Steffens? Who will pen the narratives that propel Sri Lanka's economic and social advancement? That individual could very well be amongst us today, ready to be a champion of free speech, press freedom, and the unbridled exchange of ideas. It's essential to remember that a free press isn't an adversary to Sri Lanka. It's one of its greatest allies, paving the way for a resilient and flourishing society. Thank you, and we look forward to the discussion.
Thank you, Ambassador Allen, for that brief but very impressive and informative talk. I'm not sure whether the audience are ready to ask questions, but I'd like to ask the first question while you get prepared. I read in my biodata about you about AI and how you're using it for public diplomacy. Could you expand on that, please?
Oh, great. Well, thank you for the question, and thank you for having both of us. The question's about AI and how we're using AI in public diplomacy. So I think every person in every sector of society is thinking about what AI is going to mean for them. And there's a lot of fear involved in what AI is going to mean for all of us. And that fear is rightfully founded, particularly given the power of AI in the information space when it comes to inauthentic content, manipulated content, things like deep fakes, and the fear that AI may mean we lose the concept of truth. That's a very real fear. And so in terms of managing the risks of AI in public diplomacy, the United States is working with allies and partners around the world to advance a regulatory system that manages these risks and also pursues a technological solution to, for example, authenticating content that has been created by AI. As a technical matter, we have to get to a place where people have a sense of whether or not their content was created by a human or created by AI. And we are working with technology companies on that while our policy colleagues work on a regulatory regime. So of course, misinformation and disinformation and deep faked and fake content is foremost on our minds as the biggest AI challenge in the information space. But I would argue that AI actually brings an enormous amount of opportunity for those of us in public diplomacy and strategic communications. Just a couple of ways in which we're looking at using AI is to more quickly and more effectively understand narratives. I think all of us in this room, whether you're a journalist, a small business owner, an entrepreneur, a diplomat, you all need to know what's happening in the information space. You need to know what press narratives are emerging, what opinion narratives are emerging, what are influencers saying and thinking, how is sentiment developing, good or bad. And by knowing all of those things, we can better understand the space we have to operate in to make policy or make decisions for our institutions. So the quicker we can understand narratives in the media space, the better off we all are to decide on the way forward. And AI can play an enormous role in helping us do that more quickly than human hours can, right? How many of you, I would say just at our US embassies, we have staff at our US embassies who spend hours a day around the world analyzing what's going on in the media and online. But if we can equip them with an AI tool to do that, imagine what they can do with that time that they find back. They can be out there advancing public diplomacy through actual people-to-people interactions, which is the bread and butter of the power of creating relationships amongst and between countries. Quickly, I'll also just say, I think for everybody, there's enormous translation opportunity when it comes to AI. We in the United States, we translate our content, our statements, the speeches by our president and our Secretary of State, our ambassadors. We translate those materials into a very small set of languages because we have humans doing it. But imagine our opportunity, anyone's opportunity, to think about translating content into a multitude of languages to reach people around the world. It's an enormous opportunity to talk to wider audiences, more diverse audiences, and really think about how message penetration helps.
Thank you very much for your presentation. I am Dharmasiri Lankapeli, General Secretary of the Federation of Media Employees Trade Union. My question is, the International Federation of Journalists, those days raised campaign, release and drop all charges against him, Julian Assange. What do you think about this campaign with affiliates worldwide, international federation? It is our idea is it is against press freedom, freedom of expression. What do you think about this? My question. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you for asking the question. I can say the question about what happens to Mr. Assange is largely a question for my colleagues in the Department of Justice in the United States. But I think more broadly, certainly thinking about the commitment to transparency, commitment to media freedom, the commitment to the safety of journalists is one in which the United States rests upon. And when there are potential criminal actions involved, then that is a matter for a separate jurisdiction than those of us diplomats. But around the world, we are certainly advocating for the safety of journalists everywhere. We are working to provide legal aid to journalists. We are working to provide funding to journalists. And we will continue to do so as part of our policy platform.
This year is not only for Sri Lanka, but for around the world, as well as in the US, an election year. And we know not just AI, but in the cyberspace, there's been a lot of manipulation, and we can see that as we can take a prime example, the 2016 election in the United States. So now it's 2024, so it's been it's almost going to be a decade now. Has there been any tools developed to counter such election manipulations, not just in the US, but around the world into an extent? So now Sri Lanka is strategically located in a place where elections matter, and I believe that this sort of manipulation could take place this year, as well as in the US as well. Has there been any tools, measures, programs being developed? Thank you.
Thank you so much for the question. Yes, this is the year of elections around the world. We are certainly working with our partners and allies to think about what kind of capacity building we can contribute to ensuring free and fair elections, timely elections, and that includes both structural and information space solutions. A couple thoughts on the information space, and then I'll turn to the ambassador. One of the things that the technology companies themselves are starting to do is recognize their role in this election cycle. And the United States does not ask them for specific policies. We do not moderate content on any social media platforms, but certainly the United States and governments around the world are regularly in touch with the platform so that they can make their own terms of use, their own terms of engagement evolved in a way that does help protect against free and fair elections. And so, protect free and fair elections. And so one of the things that, for example, some of the tech companies are doing is limiting on their own algorithms the type of political content that might get misused or that could be ripe for disinformation. But more broadly, one of the things the United States is doing, and one of my teams, the Global Engagement Center, is working with governments around the world to have a better analytical capability to detect mis and disinformation. Because so often, the speed at which information travels is beyond our ability to catch it and analyze it. And so that capacity building for analysis alone is an area in which we're concentrating. I would also just offer that as we think about the information space and as we think about countering disinformation, it's so hard to often refute something that's already in the public domain given the power of first impression. And so while it is incumbent upon us to call out lies, to call out mistruths, and counter them with factual information, it's also critically important that we think about making the information space healthier to begin with. And so one of the things that the United States works on with partners and allies around the world is actually how to think about a more proactive, robust, comprehensive strategic communication strategy to make the information space itself healthier and thus decrease the likelihood that disinformation would spread as the only narrative to fill a vacuum. So we're thinking a lot about that. Maybe the last thing I'll mention on making the information space healthier, besides refuting lies and refuting fiction and contributing to a more healthy space with proactive communications, are two other legs of the stool. One is why we're all here today, and that's ensuring that media can remain independent and that free media are supported. And we have to remember, though, that there's a role for the audience themselves. We have to think about making the information space healthier in terms of how information is being received. So whether it's about elections or any other issue, we believe there's a lot of opportunity to expand digital and media literacy programs to actually help people be better information consumers themselves. This is a really complex, rapidly evolving media and digital media space. Don't we know it? And we're the ones that work in it every day. I have a lot of empathy for my own friends and family, many of your own friends and family, who need to better understand how they are being manipulated and acted upon as an information consumer, and we can help them do that with training and education.
Just add on that point about media consumers and in the Sri Lankan context. I think we've seen in the past couple of years people tend to go to their echo chambers. You go to the same 5 people that you follow on social media, go to your same group of 10 friends. I think it is the responsibility is on the reader, the voter, all of you, to challenge that a little bit. Go talk to people outside of your circle of friends and who have all the same political views as you. Go to a diverse range of sources, media sources, both print, radio, online, and then challenge that. I think to be a more proactive consumer of the information is critical. There's Watchdog LK, there's a number of other similar organizations that look to fact check. So being more challenging and not passively listening and taking all the information that's out there, that'd be more critical than ever during this election year.
Yeah, I am Rifti Ali. I am editor of VDL.lk. It's a Tamil website. Also, I am using Right to Information Act in Sri Lanka. My question is, in your speech also mentioned about the Online Safety Act. Already passed Data Protection Act. That act also is going to implement March something this year. Also that Anti-Terrorism Act is on the way. So we as a journalist, we feel this all the acts it's control the mouth of, especially for journalists and media activists. So you are a media strategist activist. So can you give some advice? How can Sri Lankan journalists work during this all the acts which are control the mouth of journalists?
Well, thank you for the question. I think the ambassador and I would both welcome the opportunity to expand a little bit on the online safety bill that I mentioned briefly. And let me first start by saying that the United States does share the concerns of journalists, of influencers, of content creators, really of people everywhere, on the potential repression on freedom of expression and the stifling of dissent that the online safety bill looks to face. And we are encouraged by the amendments process. We have been offered an opportunity to give our feedback, and we have done so privately and publicly. We do share the concerns by the technology companies as well in terms of their ability to operate here in Sri Lanka freely. And that has to do just as much with their terms of service as it does with the digital economy and its ability to thrive here. I think everybody sees the digital economy as a way to continue to build Sri Lanka's economic future and to both attract investment and preserve freedom of expression. We do have concerns with the legislation as it currently stands. We think it's really important that as the amendments process for the online safety bill moves forward and as the consideration of the anti-terrorism bill moves forward before it's passed, that the conversations around that legislation be consultative. Absolutely, we have supported those discussions, including civil society, including journalists, including technology companies, including academics. We can only hope to have effective legislation if it has taken into account the equities from a variety of stakeholders, and that's something that we will continue to advocate for. In terms of what journalists can do, let me just say I have a lot of empathy for journalists operating in this current environment, given the fears surrounding the online safety bill, given, frankly, just the business models of media outfits everywhere, not just in Sri Lanka, and how challenging it is to run a profitable media business that's committed to independent investigative journalism. My only plea would be keep going. Keep going with the fortitude to know that you're providing a service to society and making institutions here stronger. And that kind of motivation is critically important. Now, of course, easier said than done. And there are some technical challenges we know that a lot of journalists are facing, including that sources are afraid to be attributed or to work with you. I heard that when I met with a group of journalists yesterday. Part of what I think is important is to raise the profile of the challenges that face journalists today as a matter of democratic principles and as a necessity for society going forward. And that's something the United States will continue to do in partnership with you.
Something else we heard yesterday from a journalist was the chilling effect that such a potential bill could have. And this journalist told us we're going to lean into professionalism and ethical journalism, which is really inspirational to hear from that journalist. And you've heard our concerns about this online safety bill, but it really goes down to 3 categories of that. It's the process, the intent, and then the implementation. The process, which many see as deeply flawed, not taking in extensive input and suggestions from a wide variety of stakeholders. The intent, while it's supposedly intended to combat things like pornography online and attacks against women and children. The broad definition is concerning. And finally, the implementation of it. We have yet to see how this bill will be implemented, and there is an amendment process we hear is undergoing. But when it's implemented, will it truly do what it says is the intent, or will it have that chilling effect? And finally, I'd like to say it's not just about the voices of the United States or the international community. More importantly than our voices are the voices of Sri Lankan citizens. A wide, broad range of tech experts, civil society, lawyers groups, private sector, many, many people and groups and associations, journalist groups around the country have raised their concerns about this bill. So I would again encourage those in government to listen to not just the United States or the international community, but most importantly, the voices of its own citizens.
I'm Tharindu Duragedara. I'm a journalist and I'm representing here media employees, FMETU, Federation of Media Employees Unions, and also I am trade union as a trade unionist. I'm representing multiple trade unions, representing multiple sectors, and at the same time I'm a street protester. I was part of the Aragale and a journalist. So here I want to ask. You mentioned OSA and I think ATA here. Everyone mentioned, but the level of oppression with these, even before these laws. Today I heard one person. Last year I was arrested. Not only me, multiple journalists was arrested, beaten. I was beaten, arrested, and multiple journalists faced that. And 6 times I went to CID. Criminal Investigation Division 6 times just to explain my posts on social media or my journalism work. Multiple people did that, and when I was arrested, one woman, lady, posted one post against my arrest. Now that woman was summoned to Bambalapiti police station because of that post. The level of oppression is too much, and the people, I am working with the farmers, trade unions representing multiple state institutions, and the level of oppression and the government's planning to pass more than 60 laws, not only oppression laws, ATA or OSA, they are passing microfinance laws and multiple changes. They are completely changing whole structure of economy. Without a mandate, they don't have a mandate. We need a chance to discuss what's going to happen. But people like us, farmers, most of us are labeled as anti-state or terrorist maybe. They're directly labeled as terrorists. Now they are passing ATA. Maybe we can label it as terrorists. So I think these things, journalists are attacked on streets, and these things are connected to the reforms that government is doing without people's mandate. Maybe all the structural changes government is doing, maybe people will approve if they go to the public and get the mandate. So how do we, so without addressing the whole changes and the structural changes government is doing, maybe with IMF support, maybe with US support, the whole structural changes, without people's mandate, they are going to international institutions. They are taking, and they are saying, because IMF is saying we have to do this or that, because creditors are saying we have to do this or that. So without going to people, without people's mandate, they are changing. We are against some of the changes, then we are going to get oppressed. So I think we don't have like basic fundamental right of saying what to do with our country. What is our future? We have to decide it. They can't decide it with IMF or US. They can't decide it. And so I'll quote Malcolm X. We are oppressed, we are exploited, we are denied not only civil rights, but basic human rights. We are denied of that, all of rights. I think this is part of that. So what is your opinion about the whole changes government is doing without people's mandates? I think they need to go for people's mandate. Without that, they can't do anything, I think.
First and foremost, of course, the protection and safety of journalists, the freedom of expression, being able to report freely is critical. So as the Undersecretary said earlier, maintaining that, leaning into that professionalism, continuing to speak out will be really important, especially during this election year. We've seen a number of editorials, investigative journalism ongoing, even in the past few weeks, that have been impressive and courageous, and we're glad to see that is continuing to thrive. But secondly, also about the various legislations that's coming into play. The United States has said this repeatedly, that economic reform and economic recovery must go hand in hand with democratic reform and governance recovery. So the two things cannot be separated. I think many times there's a focus on these IMF reforms and the policies that the Sri Lanka has agreed to do because it's good for its macroeconomic stability and to not fall back into some of the bad habits of the past that led into debt distress. But keeping that in mind while undergoing these reforms, making sure it's transparent, making sure it gets to the core of the cause of the problem, which is anti-corruption, transparency, good governance. That all goes along with the democratic governance part, not just a technical economic policy part. So we believe those two are greatly intertwined. And at a time, as you say, when many people in Sri Lanka are still suffering, you're not out of the woods yet. There's still a lot of challenges with the recent economic burdens that the common people are facing every day. How can the government then implement these reforms at the same time be able to protect the most vulnerable and communicate clearly the intent of these reforms? But ultimately, it's the people's choices to speak out about, despite these challenges, how maintaining that democratic governance space is so critical amidst the economic reforms that are also taking place.
I'm a lawyer. I'm Sanjay Wilson Jayasekara, and also I'm editor of the Socialist.lk. I just have one question from you. You are speaking about freedom of expression and journalism, and also about their safety. In Gaza, Zionist Israel has killed over 24,000 Palestinians since October 7. Over 130 journalists have been subjected to targeted assassinations of IDF, including Al Jazeera journalists, along with their entire families. But your government has been fully supporting the Israel's genocide in Gaza and has said no red lines for the massacre, even extending to bombing in Rafah. So it is reasonable to question your government's advocacy of diplomacy on the one hand and the active engagement opposed to fundamental democratic rights. I say this is hypocrisy. What is your government's defense against this allegation? Thank you.
Thank you so much for the question and for raising this. The events in the Middle East and what's happening in Gaza are on the top of all of our minds right now. And my own Secretary of State, Antony Blinken, and the President are working day and night exactly on this issue. Let me say a few things. As Secretary Blinken has said, we are not choosing between defending Israel and protecting Palestinian lives. We are working towards both of those things. And we have been clear, let me be clear today, that too many innocent Palestinian lives have been lost. Too many Palestinians have been killed. Too many children have died. And we are absolutely working not just on bringing more humanitarian aid to the Palestinian people in Gaza, but also pressing the Israelis, working with the Israelis to make clear that how they do their military campaign matters very much, and that there need to be more protections taken to protect civilian lives. We have said that, we will continue to say that. And at this point, our diplomatic focus is on getting a hostage deal to lead to a temporary cease in fighting. We believe that that is the only way to find a step forward, to find the way forward, is to hope for a temporary cessation of fighting so that all parties can continue to talk. One of the most important roles that the United States is playing is a convening role, is in making sure that Arab leaders and Israeli leaders continue to come around a table and talk. Those discussions are needed to find the way forward, and we are working very actively at a hostage deal to be able to create space for those conversations, to reduce the civilians that are being killed, and to bring more humanitarian aid into Gaza. And ultimately, we believe the only way for there to be lasting peace and security for Palestinians and Israelis alike is to have an independent Palestinian state alongside the state of Israel. And so that is at the very core of what we hope to see going forward. It is certainly the most complex challenge that we're facing right now, but we have to believe that that is possible, and that's the goal we're working towards. Thanks for raising it.
Undersecretary, I'm Prasad from National Television, Rupahini. Social media became a wide topic in this forum as well as now in Sri Lanka according to this online safety bill. And in the United States, recently a House committee convened all the social media bosses where Mark Zuckerberg had to make a public apology from a group of victims. So with that, what can you say about the US government's policy and the recent developments on social media, especially about these harmful effects as well as the behavior of social media?
Sure. Thank you for the question. So as you know, the United States has continued to engage with the leaders of tech companies, of social media companies, to ensure that their policies, that their terms of service, that their new platforms are taking into account the very real societal effects that their platforms are having on people both in the United States and around the world. We're keenly aware that global audiences are using these platforms, and they take increasing responsibility for what their platforms might mean if they are particularly misused in societies around the world. And I can tell you that the State Department takes the feedback of and the engagement with tech companies as a critical part of our own diplomacy and how we see appropriate regulation around the world. That really matters, that we have open dialogue with the social media companies. I would offer that the social media companies are in touch with us in particular on how to curb hate speech and violent speech. And what we're seeing in the information space is a proliferation of mis and disinformation that in my view is never going away and will likely only get worse with AI. And so if we can't pretend that the spigot of dis and misinformation is going to be cut off, what are the areas we can specifically focus on? And there are some key areas we're working with the social media companies on. Like I said, hate speech, violent speech, the threat of violence and harassment. These are things that we all need to see reduced, eradicated in the online space because people's lives are at stake, people's safety is at stake. The other area in which we're really focused on is the misuse of the information space, the willful manipulation of the information space by our adversaries. And we know that foreign actors, Iran, Russia, China, others, are using the information space as a theater of competition. And so we will continue to find solutions in the policy space, in the regulatory space, and in discussions with the private sector, including the tech companies, on how to make sure that we have a cohesive strategy for combating foreign malign influence.
Anjali Patrige, President of Disability Organization Joint Front. In 2012 census, 1.6 million are persons with disabilities. Out of that, 400,000 are hearing impaired. We are talking about AI technology and many things about the information. But in Sri Lanka, hearing impaired and blind persons can't access to information, even though they don't know about the Sri Lankan constitution because it's not access. My request is, can you help persons with disabilities in Sri Lanka to access to information, because in some TV channels, only 2 TV channels is giving sign language interpretation during the news, but not everything. But in Sri Lanka, national event also, they are not covered in sign language interpretation. It's very difficult for persons with disabilities. And please support us for access to information. Thank you.
I'm so glad you raised this. I'll offer just a couple thoughts, and then the ambassador might offer some thoughts about how we're putting inclusion, disability inclusion, and awareness at the center of our strategy here between the United States and Sri Lanka and our partnership. I will just say, thinking about putting disability rights and focusing on ability has been central to the Biden administration's foreign policy agenda. We have the first ever special envoy for disability rights now working at the State Department. And I'm thrilled to say she's actually going to be visiting Sri Lanka in the next few weeks. Her name's Sarah Minkara. She's an excellent colleague of mine. And she has been someone who's been able to sit down with governments and NGOs and civil society and say, how are we going to advance the human rights of those with disabilities, both seen and unseen? which I think is a critical point. There are accommodations that can be made for those with physical disabilities. We also have to be thinking about intellectual and developmental disabilities and the ties with mental health in terms of the rights of those with disabilities around the world. And so rest assured the United States is committed to doing this. To your point, having conversations about the technical and operational accommodations that can and should be made to ensure that voices can be heard. And also the policy solutions that exist to put disability rights central to the rest of our agenda. We know that disability rights are a human right, and we are acting accordingly.
And I know Sri Lanka has been undergoing a process to have a new disabilities bill, and that discussion has been ongoing for quite some time, and a lot of different aspects of that has been debated, which is why I thought this was a good time to invite our special envoy to disabilities to come to Sri Lanka. I've had several conversations with Sarah already, and she's really excited to come here to share her thoughts and her views, and also learn from Sri Lankan communities about this very important topic, which we believe is really a fundamental part of human rights. So thank you for raising that.
Ms. Allen, Mina Fernandez from Al Jazeera. If I may go back to Gaza, but ask a very sort of a narrow question, frame it within the media, not about the broader issues, which there's a lot of debate about. Your talk was on global media space and its impact on democracy. How do you respond to allegations that in Gaza, that the messenger, journalists are being targeted very, very clearly, and being such a close ally of Israel, how do you put that side by side with your diplomacy that talks about the need for space for journalists to operate and operate freely? How do you justify, or how do you see what Israel is doing to journalists in Gaza and now in other areas of the West Bank?
Yeah, thank you for the question. And as I mentioned before, as someone who has worked with journalists my entire career, this is an issue of particular importance to me personally. Let me just say that we are absolutely concerned about what we've seen where journalists have been targeted or allegations of targeting. We have raised those concerns with the Israelis. We will continue to do that while we advocate for journalists to be able to operate freely in Gaza. And so there are certainly messages that are delivered both publicly and privately. We are also working with media outlets, both in the region and international media outlets, to ensure that their journalists can operate safely and have freedom of movement. So that will continue to be central to our effort.
I'm Sakif, a junior academic staff of State University and a practice and a journalist. And my question is, some researchers say actually social media algorithm influence the opinion shaping, especially the political political ideology of users. May I know, are there any policy level decision to monitor how social media algorithm works, and are there any legal framework to control technical giants to monitor and to regulate the algorithm?
This is a really great question, and I have about 3 thoughts. The first is, I think we need to be very clear-eyed about the ability for any government to regulate social media companies just by virtue of their vast reach and complexity of their technology. I think there's a little bit more progress we can make in terms of our conversations with them more informally about informing their terms of service and their terms of use. We've seen regulation coming out of the EU on this. The EU is ahead on digital regulation, on social media company regulation. That is still very much a work in progress and remains to be seen just how effective it can be, particularly in making sure that we can balance freedom of expression concerns, frankly. So the United States has not legislated this. I think that our best chance for constructive cooperation on how they may approach their technology is, like I said before, through conversations between them and governments around the world. But look, this is also, the algorithm problem, in my view, is actually not a technological one. Certainly it's underpinned by technology, but actually the fact that we have echo chambers, as drastic as they are, is the fact that we have a social media space that only serves to reinforce bias and actually make bias more extreme, means I think we need to double down on the work of building people-to-people relationships. And I'm not just saying that because it's my portfolio. I'm saying that because I truly believe and have seen here in Sri Lanka that really forcing people-to-people convening, really emphasizing the importance of having interpersonal relationships is going to be one of the ways in which we can resist the power of algorithms societally, right? People need to be out there talking to people of different backgrounds. They need to have an emotional intelligence to go alongside of their information intelligence. Those things are really important. I also think that we have to be reaching youth sooner than later on how to be information consumers. So we talked earlier about media and digital literacy. That is really critical, I think, to get into schools earlier than later, to offer curriculum that's free. We're doing so as the US government. Our US Embassy has what we call American Corners. We have 5 of them throughout Sri Lanka as an example. And we invite youth in to come access resources, come in for programming. And one of the things we're doing is media literacy programming. Because while we can't, we as the United States government can't speak for the social media companies and their algorithm, we can speak for what we can do to educate people on being better information consumers. And in sitting around tables with each other to build the kinds of relationships that instill critical thinking and instill confidence in people to navigate the complex information space going forward.
I started my career back in 2019. I came from the public relations sector to journalism, even though a lot of people want me not to. My first training was in media literacy and ethics that was conducted by the American Center involved with the US Embassy as well. And so far I've gone through 24 programs, grants, investigative grants as well. And now I'm just heading the web desk of The Morning, a national news brand. But one thing that I have seen that since we are actively recruiting, since we are expanding, there's not a lot of young journalists who are, young people who are interested in becoming journalists. And those who are interested do not have the specific training for that. And I have identified that this negativity towards coming to this career is because mainly it's financial. Yeah, the pay is very low. The other thing is that the responsibilities outweigh the benefits. And it's very hard to convince a young person who's straight out of school or straight out of graduate to becoming a journalist. It's other people like myself who come from different other industries to journalism. There are no, like back in the day, straight out journalists. And the other thing is, in Sri Lanka, we do not have a journalism degree. There are there are programs conducted by the Sri Lanka Press Institute and other institutes as well, but there are no formal qualifications to becoming a journalist in Sri Lanka. And I believe, and this is one of the most concerning things in Sri Lanka, and in the future I believe there will be less and less young people interested in becoming journalists. And I request, and as a product of what the American people has given to Sri Lanka, I could tell you that I am also a product, and I'm just saying, putting it out. I don't care if someone brands me or labels me, but still, we do not have enough training, enough funding to churn out more journalists in Sri Lanka. And I believe so far in the past 5 years, these programs have put out enough people to voice their concerns about democracy and what's happening in this country. But I believe it's not enough, and it's very hard to recruit more journalists. If there's any more possibility to increase more funding and more trainings to churn out more journalists and those sort of people in Sri Lanka, I believe it would be very beneficial for Sri Lanka as a country and Sri Lanka's youth. Thank you.
Well, I completely agree with you that whether it's financial or other issues that prohibit young people from wanting to become journalists, that is very real here in Sri Lanka and in many countries. And while we will continue to provide some training in the United States and here, we really believe in the value of that kind of training. It'll take much, much more, right? It's institutional. It takes the commitment, the political will of various government entities, ministries, the industry coming together and saying, this is important to a society. This is the fundamental foundations of a democracy, to have a thriving, professional, free media and press. So I'm glad you raised this, because I hope this causes more discussion and debate about this issue, the critical needs that are out there, and for people like you to be out there mentoring those young people to become journalists. I think it's such an important thing for this country to continue to thrive, to really have a strengthened, emboldened journalism sector.
I'll only just be very quick by saying that the points are very well taken. Absolutely, there are structural solutions. Where you say that we don't see a lot of young people wanting to be journalists, and that agreed because of the challenges of the industry, which is a global problem. But what I will say is that young people absolutely want their voice to be heard. And there's power in that, there's opportunity in that. And so as we think about how to enable the next generation and chart the kind of future that you want to see here in Sri Lanka, part of it begins with seeing young people, helping them realize the power of their voice, provide them with training, solutions, and skills to exercise that voice, alongside advocacy, as we've talked about here today, for legislation and structural solutions to allow for freedom of expression, while we work on the health of the journalism industry. But at the core of it is making sure that people still feel like their voice matters, can be heard, and can be expressed. And that will continue to be our goal.
I'd like to add to that the Sri Lanka Press Institute, we have a College of Journalism, and we are trying very hard now to revive it and take it forward because the very reasons that you mentioned. I'd like to thank Under Secretary for giving us her time, and for Ambassador Chung for sharing her with us on your behalf and the Sri Lanka Press Institute. So thank you very much, Ambassadors, for being with us today, sharing